Have you ever made a completely, just a totally irrational decision and then realized it was a terrible choice in hindsight and found yourself just staring at the wall, wondering, why on earth did I just do that?
Oh, yeah, constantly.
Right, like you are sitting there surveying the aftermath of a choice you made entirely of your own volition, and you think to yourself, I am a smart, rational human being. I have a highly evolved prefrontal cortex.
Exactly.
How did I just spectacularly fail at basic logic? Because you are definitely not alone in that feeling. I mean, it is this nearly universal human experience to look at our own judgments and feel like we're operating this perfectly engineered billion-dollar spacecraft, only to discover that the autopilot is quietly steering us directly into an asteroid field.
It's a profoundly disorienting realization, honestly, because we all walk around with this deeply ingrained assumption that we are rational actors.
Yeah.
You know, the classical economic model of human behavior relies really heavily on this, the idea that we observe the world, gather the facts, objectively weigh the pros and cons, and then execute a calculated choice designed to maximize our utility.
Which sounds great on paper.
It sounds wonderful, but the reality of human cognition, as the data reveals, is far, far messier. I mean, our brains are indeed evolutionary marvels, but they are absolutely riddled with hidden shortcuts and systemic errors that continually warp our perception of reality.
And that evolutionary mismatch is exactly what we're investigating today. The goal for this deep dive is to sort of lift the hood on this mental machinery, right? To uncover exactly why the human brain, despite its massive processing power, routinely tricks us into making bad judgments even when we know better.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area.
To do that, we're looking at a really great stack of sources today. We have comprehensive encyclopedic data on cognitive biases, which synthesizes decades of rigorous research across cognitive science, social psychology, behavioral economics, all of it. And we are grounding this entire exploration in the foundational concepts from Daniel Kahneman's groundbreaking work, Thinking Fast and Slow.
Yeah, Kahneman's work, which much of it was done alongside his longtime collaborator, Amos Tversky, it essentially dismantled that traditional assumption that humans are perfectly rational, utility-maximizing machines.
Completely tore it down.
They replaced that myth with a highly detailed map of human vulnerability, demonstrating through these remarkably elegant experiments how our everyday choices are manipulated.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. I mean, we are going to explore the underlying mechanics of why you buy things you do not need, how you fundamentally misjudge the motivations of the people around you, and perhaps most disturbingly, why your own memory actively lies to you.
I think most of our listeners are probably familiar with the pop psychology baseline of Kahneman's work, right? The idea that we have two different operating systems in our brains. He famously categorized them as System 1 and System 2.
Right, exactly.
And we generally understand System 1 as the fast, instinctual brain, and System 2 as the slow, calculating brain. But what the encyclopedic data reveals, which goes far beyond those basic definitions, is the actual, metabolic and neurological reality of how these two systems interact.
And why one of them almost always dominates the other.
Yes. So talk about that metabolic reality, because that blew my mind.
Yeah, so that metabolic reality is the key to understanding human error. System 1 is our automatic, frequent, emotional, and largely unconscious mode of thought. It operates lightning fast, with little to no effort, and absolutely no sense of voluntary control.
Just totally running in the background.
Exactly. If you hear a sudden, loud sound, System 1 instantly localizes the source and jerks your head toward it. Or if I show you a horrific, gruesome image, System 1 triggers a physical expression of disgust on your face before you even consciously register what the image is.
Oh, wow. Right.
You do not decide to feel disgusted. The physiological reaction just washes over you. It is the system that automatically completes the phrase war and. Right. It instantly knows that 2 + 2 = 4, and it allows you to drive your car on an empty highway while your conscious mind is completely lost in a daydream.
Which is a terrifying thought, but we all do it. And contrast that with System 2, which is our slow, effortful, logical, conscious mode.
Yeah, the heavy lifter.
Right. This is the system that allocates attention to highly demanding mental activities. It is the intense focus of a sprinter waiting for the starting gun, or like the cognitive strain you feel if I ask you to multiply 17 by 24 in your head right now.
Which I will not attempt.
Please don't. But System 2 is what takes over when you are trying to parallel park in a tight space on a really busy street and turn down the radio. Right?
Oh, totally. You have to lower the volume to see better.
Exactly. It is the part of the brain that feels like us. When we think of ourselves as conscious, reasoning beings, we are identifying with System 2. But here's the biological catch: System 2 is incredibly expensive to run.
Metabolically speaking.
Right. The human brain makes up roughly 2% of our body weight, but it consumes about 20% of our energy. Conscious, focused thought physically burns glucose at an accelerated rate.
And because of that massive energy constraint, System 2 is inherently lazy.
Yeah.
It cannot operate continuously. If you had to consciously calculate every single decision, which foot to put in front of the other, how to interpret the micro expressions on a coworker's face, whether a shadow in your peripheral vision is a threat, you would be biologically paralyzed within minutes.
Your brain would just crash.
Literally.
Okay.
So an evolutionary compromise was struck. System 1 runs in the background as the default, effortlessly generating impressions, intuitions, and feelings. And it continuously feeds these suggestions to System 2.
Okay.
If System 2 endorses them, and to save energy, it usually does, those automatic impressions turn into our formal beliefs and voluntary actions. System 1 is a secret author of many of the choices you consider to be highly rational.
I was trying to find a modern analogy for this dynamic that moves beyond the typical fast versus slow paradigm. And it strikes me that System 1 is essentially the autocorrect on your smartphone.
Oh, I like that.
Right. Autocorrect is lightning fast. It runs entirely in the background. And 95% of the time, it is an absolute lifesaver. It fixes your typographical errors before you even realize your thumb slipped. It keeps the flow of communication moving seamlessly.
Yeah.
But because it operates on pure statistical association rather than like deep comprehension, every once in a while, it changes a perfectly normal word into something completely inappropriate, entirely changing the context of your message and creating a catastrophe.
Yeah, sending a text to your boss that makes zero sense or is wildly offensive.
Exactly.
That is very apt functional comparison. And in that scenario, System 2 is you choosing to manually type out a complex, highly sensitive email. You are agonizing over every single word, analyzing the tone, deleting and rewriting. You are in total conscious control, but it drains your mental battery. And you certainly cannot do it while walking through a crowded room without bumping into someone.
Because it demands all your attention.
Exactly. We simply do not have the metabolic capacity to live our entire lives in that manual System 2 drafting mode.
So if our brains are biologically hardwired to let System 1 handle the vast majority of our processing to conserve energy, that means we are entirely dependent on the associative shortcuts System 1 uses.
We are.
And those shortcuts are the exact vectors where cognitive glitches occur. Like when psychologists talk about heuristics, they're talking about these specific mental shortcuts.
Right. Yes. System 1 uses heuristics to make incredibly swift estimates under conditions of uncertainty. To really grasp how deeply these shortcuts compromise our logic, we have to look at the math behind them.
Let's do it.
Specifically through the lens of one of Kahneman and Tversky's most famous experiments, which is the Linda problem.
I love this one.
It perfectly illustrates how our brains quietly substitute complex logic for easy assumptions. So in the experiment, subjects are given a brief character sketch of a fictional woman named Linda. She is described as young, single, outspoken, and highly intelligent.
Okay.
They are told that as a college student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and that she frequently participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations.
So we have a very specific picture of who Linda is.
Right. After establishing that profile, the researchers asked the subjects to determine which of two scenarios is more statistically probable. Option A, Linda is a bank teller. Or Option B, Linda is a bank teller, and she is active in the feminist movement.
And when they run this test, the overwhelming majority of people, like even highly educated individuals with backgrounds in statistics, choose Option B.
They do.
They look at that description and conclude that it is more probable that Linda is a feminist bank teller than just a bank teller. But choosing Option B is a catastrophic mathematical failure.
It really is.
I mean, it is a logical impossibility for Option B to be more probable than Option A.
The mathematics are undeniable. I mean, if you visualize a Venn diagram, right, you have one massive circle representing every single bank teller in the world.
Right.
Then you have a separate circle representing people active in the feminist movement. Option B, a feminist bank teller only exists in the tiny intersecting fraction where those two circles overlap.
Just that little sliver in the middle.
Exactly. Option A represents the entire comprehensive circle of bank tellers, which completely encompasses that small intersection. Therefore, it is statistically impossible for a subset of a category to be larger or more probable than the broader category itself.
Right, because every single feminist bank teller is necessarily a bank teller.
Precisely.
When you lay out the formal logic, it is so obvious. Yet, in the moment, a room full of intelligent adults will look at a basic statistical impossibility and confidently choose it.
Yeah.
The encyclopedic sources explain this phenomenon through a mechanism called attribute substitution.
Yes, this is key.
When System 1 is confronted with a difficult, cognitively demanding question, such as, what are the Bayesian probabilities of these two occupational outcomes? It just hits a wall. System 1 cannot do complex probability.
It has no idea how to do that.
So, entirely unconsciously, it swaps out the hard question for an easier one that it can answer. It replaces the statistical question with a matching game. How much does this description resemble our cultural stereotype of a feminist?
Right, it substitutes probability for resemblance. And the specific shortcut is known as the representativeness heuristic. We judge the likelihood of an event by the extent to which it resembles a typical case.
Which makes sense on a surface level.
Right, because Linda strongly resembles the stereotype of a feminist and doesn't particularly match the stereotype of a bank teller. System 1 signals a strong match for option B.
It's like ding, 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 we have a match.
Exactly. It pushes that confident intuition up to System 2, and System 2, conserving its energy, rubber stamps the intuition without ever running the underlying math.
Lazy System 2.
Very lazy. This leads directly to the conjunction fallacy, which is the erroneous belief that two specific conditions occurring simultaneously are more probable than a single general condition.
We are literally answering a different question than the one we were asked.
Right.
And we are completely blind to the substitution.
Totally blind.
And System 1 uses several of these substitution tricks. Like another pervasive one detailed in the sources is the availability heuristic. Instead of evaluating the actual statistical frequency of an event, we judge its likelihood by how easily examples come to mind. If an image is vivid, emotional, and easily recalled, System 1 assumes the event must be highly probable and fundamentally important.
And the availability heuristic has profound real-world implications, particularly regarding how we assess risk. It explains why a person might be petrified of flying on a commercial airline, but completely comfortable texting while driving their car to the airport.
Which is mathematically insane.
Completely. Statistically, the drive is exponentially more dangerous than the flight. But everyday car accidents do not command breaking news coverage, right? They are mundane and easily forgotten.
You see them on the side of the road and forget about it 5 minutes later.
Exactly. A plane crash, however, is intensely dramatic, heavily reported, and visually terrifying. Those fiery images are highly available in our memory.
Yeah.
System 1 accesses that vivid memory instantly and artificially inflates the perceived probability of the threat.
You know, I want to look at this from a slightly different angle. If our brains are so riddled with these fallacies, the System 1 is constantly leading us to make profound mathematical errors and fundamentally misjudge basic risks. How did we survive long enough to build modern civilization?
It's a valid question.
Right. Like if we're operating with such deeply flawed cognitive machinery, shouldn't natural selection have weeded these traits out? It seems like we might be looking at ancient biological survival mechanisms and unfairly grading them against a modern statistics exam.
That tension is actually at the core of what evolutionary psychologists call the rationality war.
The rationality war.
Yeah. The sources bring up Gerd Gigerenzer, a prominent psychologist who strongly critiques the framing of heuristics as irrational biases or defects.
Okay, so he's on the side of our brains.
Very much so. Gigerenzer champions a concept known as ecological rationality. His argument is that we should not measure human cognition against formal logic or probability calculus because those mathematical frameworks simply did not exist in our ancestral environment.
They're a recent invention.
Right. In the real world, particularly the Pleistocene environment where our brains evolved, survival required fast and frugal decision-making.
Which means a heuristic isn't a glitch. It is an optimized survival tool.
Exactly.
If you are a hunter-gatherer on the savannah and you hear a rustle in the tall grass, you don't have the luxury of sitting down to calculate the base rate probability of a predator being in that specific sector.
You'd be eaten while doing the math.
Exactly. If the rustle resembles the movement of a tiger, Employing the representativeness heuristic, your system 1 floods your body with adrenaline and you run. The cost of a false positive running from the wind is simply a few burned calories.
Right.
The cost of a false negative ignoring the rustle because the base rate math suggested is unlikely is death.
And Jurenser's point is that human cognition is highly adapted to the specific environments in which it evolved. In situations of extreme uncertainty, limited time, and limited information, these gut feelings are often the most mathematically optimal strategies available.
So the issue is not that our brains are fundamentally broken or inherently irrational.
No, not at all.
The issue is the environmental mismatch.
Yes.
The fast and frugal shortcuts that kept us alive on the savannah are completely overwhelmed by the modern world. We are no longer just dodging predators, we are navigating complex financial derivatives, algorithmic social media feeds, and sophisticated marketing campaigns that are deliberately designed to exploit those ancient shortcuts.
Oh, absolutely.
If our brains are hardwired to rely on associative context to make rapid judgments, what happens when external actors weaponize that context against us?
They can manipulate our reality with disturbing ease.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the specific traps of context detailed in the data, beginning with the anchoring bias.
Let's get into anchoring, because this one is everywhere.
It really is. Anchoring is our tendency to rely heavily, almost magnetically, on the first piece of information offered, the anchor, when making subsequent decisions.
Even if it makes no sense.
Right. Because System 1 struggles to evaluate value or probability in an absolute vacuum, it desperately latches onto any available starting point, even if that starting point is entirely irrelevant.
The sources detail an experiment by Kahneman regarding Mahatma Gandhi that perfectly isolates this mechanism. It's so clever.
It's brilliant.
Researchers divided an audience into two groups. They asked the first group, was Mahatma Gandhi older or younger than 114 years old when he died?
Now, everyone knows no one lives to 114, so it is clearly a nonsense question.
Right. Then they asked the second group, was Mahatma Gandhi older or younger than 35 years old when he died? Again, obviously younger than the reality, as Gandhi was globally recognized as an elder statesman. We've all seen the pictures.
Sure.
After presenting those absurd initial questions, the researchers asked both groups the actual target question. How old was Mahatma Gandhi when he died?
Right.
Logically, since the numbers 114 and 35 were explicitly arbitrary and factually incorrect, they should have had zero impact on the final estimates.
None whatsoever.
Yet the data showed massive manipulation. The group initially exposed to the number 114 guessed a final age that was significantly higher than the group exposed to the number 35.
I was looking at the neurological theory behind why this happens, and it is fascinating. It is not just that we are bad at guessing.
What's actually happening in the brain?
When you hear the number 114, your System 1 unconsciously begins a process of semantic priming.
Okay.
It tries to make sense of the anchor by selectively activating memory nodes that make the number seem plausible. So it pulls up images of Gandhi looking exceptionally frail, ancient, and weathered. When the other group hears 35, their brains selectively activate different memory nodes, perhaps of Gandhi as a younger, vital activist.
So the irrelevant number literally alters the associative network in your brain.
It drags your final estimate toward the anchor, and this cognitive vulnerability is exploited constantly in the real world. Anchoring dictates how retail prices are negotiated, how initial salary offers pull the final agreed-upon wage down, and even how the justice system operates.
Wait, the justice system?
Yes, the sources note studies where experienced judges reviewing the exact same criminal case files issued significantly longer prison sentences if they had just rolled a pair of loaded dice that landed on a high number.
That is horrifying.
The arbitrary number anchored their judgment of a human being's freedom.
Wow. It just demonstrates that we have almost no internal objective scale for measurement. We are completely dependent on comparisons and context.
And nowhere is this clearer than in the framing effect and the underlying mechanics of prospect theory, which Kahneman won a Nobel Prize for developing.
Prospect theory.
Yeah, prospect theory maps out how humans actually evaluate risk and reward, proving that we do not look at absolute outcomes. We look at changes from a specific reference point.
Okay, so we're comparing it to where we started.
Exactly. The foundational insight of prospect theory is that human beings are profoundly loss-averse. Psychologically, the pain of losing a resource is significantly more intense than the pleasure of gaining an equivalent resource.
So losing $100 feels way worse than finding $100 feels good.
Exponentially worse. And this, again, traces back to evolutionary biology. In a subsistence environment, acquiring an extra day's worth of food is a pleasant bonus, but losing a day's worth of food could mean starvation.
Organisms that treated threats as more urgent than opportunities had a much higher probability of surviving and passing on their genes.
Exactly right.
And because of this hardwired loss aversion, you can completely change a person's decision just by changing the words used to describe the exact same mathematical reality.
The framing.
Right. The classic framing experiment involves a medical scenario. Patients are told they have a severe illness and must decide on a surgical intervention. When the doctor describes the surgery by saying, "This procedure has a 90% survival rate," the vast majority of patients agree to it.
Because survival triggers a feeling of safety and gain.
Exactly. However, when a different doctor presents the exact same surgery to a different group of patients and says, "This procedure has a 10% mortality rate," acceptance plummets.
People just panic.
Patients are terrified and decline the intervention. The mathematical reality, 90% survival and 10% mortality, is completely identical. But System 1 does not process the math. It processes the emotional valence of the words.
Right. Mortality triggers the amygdala, signaling a severe loss, and our evolutionary loss aversion overrides our logical assessment of the procedure's efficacy.
It is the same dynamic that drives real estate pricing, as noted in the encyclopedic data. People were asked to estimate the value of a residential property. Afterward, they were shown a second, completely unrelated property. Their valuation of the second house was heavily skewed by the price of the first house.
Because we lack a precise internal calculator for the intrinsic value of brick and mortar,
Right, we just use whatever's nearby.
we immediately use the first house as a reference point, anchoring our subsequent judgments.
So if we are this easily manipulated by external numbers and carefully chosen words, it really raises a serious question about how we evaluate our own internal lives. Like, if we cannot accurately value a house without an anchor, how accurately do we value our own capabilities and predict our own futures?
Oh, the evidence suggests we evaluate our own futures with a staggering degree of unearned confidence.
We think highly of ourselves.
Very highly. When we look at biases directed inward, we encounter what Kahneman considers perhaps the most significant cognitive bias of all, the optimism bias, which manifests heavily in the planning fallacy.
The planning fallacy is our systemic tendency to vastly overestimate the benefits of our own projects while simultaneously underestimating the costs, the time, and the risks required to complete them.
Everyone is guilty of this.
The sources cite a painfully relatable statistic regarding this fallacy. In a 2002 survey, American homeowners who were planning a kitchen remodel were asked to estimate their total budget. On average, they expected the project to cost $18,658.
Which is very specific.
Right. The actual finalized cost of those remodels averaged $38,769.
Ouch.
They were off by more than double. And anyone who has ever attempted a home improvement project or tried to launch a startup or even just planned to write a paper over the weekend knows this exact failure. We build a fantasy of a frictionless future.
We really do. And Kahneman developed a brilliant framework to explain exactly why our brains construct these frictionless fantasies. He calls it WYSIAT, which is an acronym for what you see is all there is.
WYSID.
Yeah. When System 1 is planning a project, it builds its narrative using exclusively the information that is immediately available to it, the known knowns.
So just the stuff right in front of us.
Right. It looks at the cost of the cabinets, the hourly rate of the contractor, and the current price of tile. It seamlessly connects these visible dots into a highly coherent, highly optimistic, best-case scenario.
But the narrative is coherent only because System 1 actively ignores everything it doesn't know.
Precisely.
It fails to account for the known unknowns, variables we are aware of but lack data on, like potential shipping delays. And it is completely blind to the unknown unknowns, the utterly unpredictable external shocks, like discovering structural termite damage behind the drywall or a sudden change in local zoning laws.
Yeah, System 1 doesn't like blank spaces, so it just ignores them.
Right. WYSIAT means our brains confuse the coherence of the story with its actual probability. We think, this plan makes perfect sense in my head, therefore it is highly likely to succeed.
This creates a pervasive illusion of control. We severely underestimate the role of statistical chance and random variance in our lives. We assume that because we have agency, we can simply bend reality to match our optimistic timeline.
And when reality inevitably asserts itself, when the kitchen remodel hits $25,000, the timeline stretches by 3 months, and the termite damage is exposed, we encounter another massive cognitive hurdle.
Oh, yes.
We do not logically reevaluate the project and cut our losses. We push forward because of the sunk cost fallacy.
The sunk cost fallacy is fascinating because it directly pits our loss aversion against basic economics. Traditional economic theory dictates that sunk costs money or time that has already been spent and cannot be recovered should have absolutely zero weight in a present decision.
Because it's gone.
It's gone. You should only evaluate the future costs against the future benefits. But the human brain is practically incapable of doing that.
Right. If we walk away from the half-finished kitchen, we are forcing ourselves to formally recognize a massive loss.
And as prospect theory proved, taking a defined loss is psychologically agonizing.
So we throw good money after bad.
We really do. We authorize the extra $15,000, not because we believe it is a good investment, but to postpone the emotional pain of regret. We use future resources to try and vindicate our past mistakes.
It's just a cycle.
And the remarkable thing is, even after the project finishes at double the budget and double the time, we rarely learn our lesson. Our ego employs a defense mechanism called hindsight bias, often referred to as the "I knew it all along" effect.
Right. Hindsight bias is essentially memory tampering.
Literally.
After an unpredictable event occurs, our brains retroactively update our memory networks to make the event seem like it was predictable all along.
We do this all the time without realizing it.
We look at the termite damage and tell ourselves, I always suspected there might be issues behind that wall. I mean, it's an old house.
Yeah.
By rewriting our own history, we erase our blindness. We protect our illusion of control.
Which ensures that the very next time we plan a project, we will be just as blindly optimistic as before. It's incredible. And that internal overconfidence is dangerous enough when it comes to personal budgets, right?
Right.
But when we externalize that overconfidence, when we turn our flawed, context-blind judgment toward other people, the consequences scale up to societal dysfunction.
This leads us right into the biases governing social interaction, most notably the fundamental attribution error.
The FAE.
Right. The fundamental attribution error, or FAE, is the psychological tendency to heavily overemphasize personality-based explanations for the behaviors we observe in others, while vastly underemphasizing the situational forces acting upon them.
Give me an example of how that plays out.
So if I see a coworker snap at a barista, my system one immediately concludes that coworker is an inherently rude, aggressive person. I attribute the behavior to their fundamental character.
Right.
But if I snap at a barista, I instantly attribute it to my situation. I slept poorly. I am under immense pressure at work. The barista was moving unusually slow. I am a victim of complex circumstances. But you are just a flawed human being. Wow. We afford ourselves all the context in the world and none to anybody else.
Exactly. The FAE occurs because when we observe another person, the person is the primary focal point of our visual and cognitive attention. The external pressures acting on them are invisible to us.
And the encyclopedic sources highlight a foundational 1967 study by Jones and Harris that demonstrates the shocking durability of this error.
Yes.
In the experiment, subjects were asked to read essays written by university students. The essays took either a strong pro-Castro stance or a strong anti-Castro stance regarding Cuban politics.
Yeah.
And I want to pause here really quickly to note to the listener that we are examining this study purely as a historical milestone in cognitive psychology, right? Exactly as it appears in the scientific literature.
Yes.
We are focusing solely on the neurological mechanics of the participants' judgments, completely detached from the political content of the essays. We are absolutely not taking a stance on the politics themselves.
Precisely. We're just looking at the human behavior.
Yeah.
So in the first phase of the experiment, the readers were told that the student writers had freely chosen which side of the argument to take. Naturally, when the readers were asked to estimate the true private attitudes of the writers, they assumed the students who wrote pro-Castro essays genuinely held pro-Castro beliefs, and the anti-Castro writers held anti-Castro beliefs.
Which is a logical assumption based on free choice.
Completely logical.
But the crucial phase is the second condition. The researchers explicitly informed a new group of readers that the essay writers had been assigned their positions by a debate coach.
Right.
The readers knew, as an objective fact, that the writers had absolutely no choice in the matter. The essay was forced upon them by external situational pressure.
And this is where it gets crazy. Because when the second group of readers was asked to estimate the writers' true private attitudes, they still overwhelmingly attributed pro-Castro beliefs to the writers of the pro-Castro essays.
Wait, really? Even though they knew they were forced to write it?
Yes. Despite being explicitly handed the situational context, their brains completely discarded it.
That is wild.
The FAE is so powerful that even when the external constraint is obvious and stated clearly, System 1 defaults to substituting the visible action for the invisible character. It is simply too cognitively demanding for System 2 to calculate the complex interplay of personal belief versus situational coercion.
When you take that fundamental inability to accurately judge context and you combine it with our emotional biases, you really begin to understand the modern crisis of digital information.
Oh, absolutely.
The encyclopedic sources detail a massive 2018 study by Laser, Baum, and Grinberg that analyzed the spread of information on Twitter. They tracked over 16,000 false news stories shared by millions of users, and the data revealed a chilling reality. False news and misinformation spread significantly faster, deeper, and more broadly than true, factually accurate news.
And the mechanics of cognitive bias are the engine of that viral spread. Digital misinformation is practically weaponized to exploit two specific vulnerabilities.
No, go there.
The first is confirmation bias. This is our innate drive to search for, interpret, and favor information that validates our pre-existing beliefs. Encountering evidence that contradicts our worldview induces a state of cognitive dissonance, which is a literal psychological discomfort or tension.
It actually feels bad to be wrong.
Right. To alleviate that tension, we actively seek out echo chambers. Misinformation is often algorithmically tailored to perfectly align with a user's preconceived suspicions.
Think about the last time you saw a headline that perfectly confirmed what you already suspected about a rival group. Did you pause to use System 2, or did System 1 hit the retweet button?
Exactly. When you see a fabricated headline that confirms exactly what you already believed, your brain experiences a rush of dopamine and cognitive ease, prompting an immediate urge to share it.
It is the intellectual equivalent of highly processed junk food. It is engineered to taste incredibly satisfying to System 1, bypassing the analytical filtering of System 2 entirely.
That's a great way to put it. And the second vulnerability is our old friend, the availability heuristic. Accurate news is often nuanced, statistical, and frankly, a bit boring. It requires System 2 processing.
It takes effort to read and understand.
Right. Misinformation, however, is intentionally designed to be novel, shocking, and emotionally enraging. It triggers moral outrage or existential fear.
And because it generates such a high state of emotional arousal, it becomes highly available in memory. Our evolutionary wiring dictates that anything evoking strong fear or anger must be critically important to our survival.
And social media algorithms, which are designed to maximize engagement rather than truth, detect this intense emotional response and aggressively amplify the content. The algorithm is simply a mirror reflecting our own cognitive biases back at us at light speed.
It really is. So we have spent this entire time looking at how our brains distort external realities, how we misunderstand risk, how we misjudge our own plans, and how we are manipulated by algorithms and anchors. But Kahneman's work points to an even deeper, more existential distortion.
Yes, the distortion of self.
It is not just that we misperceive the world around us, we fundamentally misperceive our own lived experience. This brings us to the concept of the time-traveling brain and the division between what Kahneman calls the experiencing self and the remembering self.
This distinction is arguably one of Kahneman's most profound philosophical contributions to psychology. He demonstrated that we do not possess a single unified identity when evaluating our happiness.
Which is a heavy thought.
It is. The experiencing self is the consciousness living in the present moment. It answers the immediate question, how does this feel right now? It is a continuous, unbroken stream of sensory and emotional data.
So if a researcher pages you every 5 minutes and asks you to rate your current mood, they are measuring the well-being of your experiencing self.
Exactly.
It is the me that is currently breathing, feeling the chair I'm sitting in, and processing these words. But that continuous stream of data vanishes almost instantly. What remains is the remembering self.
The remembering self is the archivist and the storyteller. It answers the question, how is that experience on the whole? It takes the endless data stream of the experiencing self, heavily edits it, and files it away.
But the remembering self does not function like a video camera recording objective reality.
Not at all. It is a highly biased editor, driven by a phenomenon known as duration neglect and the peak-end rule.
Duration neglect is truly bizarre when you think about it logically. The remembering self almost completely ignores how long an experience lasted.
It just throws that data out.
Objectively, to the experiencing self, being in physical pain for 10 hours is exponentially worse than being in pain for 1 hour. But when the remembering self evaluates a past event, the duration is largely irrelevant.
Instead, the peak end rule dictates that we judge an experience almost entirely based on only two specific moments: the absolute peak intensity of the emotion, whether positive or negative, and exactly how the experience ended.
Kahneman illustrated this beautifully with a theoretical construct detailed in the sources. Imagine a woman named Helen. We want to know if Helen was happy in the month of March.
Right.
To her experiencing self, if she spent the vast majority of March engaged in fulfilling activities, feeling relaxed and joyous, her experiencing self objectively had a wonderful month. The net area under the curve of her daily happiness was highly positive.
A great month.
But let's say the final 3 days of March were incredibly stressful. Perhaps she received some bad news or had a bitter argument that left her feeling deeply upset right as the month closed.
So she had a bad ending.
Right. If you ask Helen in mid-April, how was your month of March? She's not consulting her experiencing self. She's consulting her remembering self. Because the end of the month was intensely negative, her remembering self will retroactively taint the entire period.
She will likely say March was a very difficult month.
Yes. The remembering self effectively deletes 3 weeks of lived joy because of a bad finale.
The evolutionary logic behind this, while frustrating, makes a certain grim sense. Memory evolved not to provide us with an accurate historical record of our lives, but to help us make future survival decisions.
Okay, so how does the peak end rule help with survival?
Well, the peak intensity of an event tells us the maximum threat or reward potential.
Like, how bad could this predator hurt me? Or how good is this fruit?
Exactly. And the end of the event tells us the ultimate resolution. Did we escape, or did we eat the fruit and feel full? The duration is actually less biologically relevant for predicting future outcomes.
The classic analogy for this is the ruined vacation.
Oh, this one hurts to think about.
It's like you save up, you take a 2-week trip to a beautiful tropical island. For 13 days, your experiencing self is in paradise. The weather is flawless, the food is incredible, you're perfectly relaxed, you are living a mathematically massive amount of joy.
Just absolute bliss.
But on the 14th day, during the chaotic cab ride to the airport to fly home, you realize your wallet was stolen.
The worst.
You panic, you miss your flight, you spend hours dealing with authorities. It is a miserable ending.
And when you return home, your remembering self takes the microphone. When colleagues ask how the trip was, you declare it a complete disaster. You label it the stolen wallet trip.
The remembering self entirely overwrites the 13 days of objective paradise because the peak negative emotion coincided with the end of the experience.
Kahneman famously observed, "Odd as it may seem, I am my remembering self, and the experiencing self who does my living is like a stranger to me."
That is just so haunting. We make all of our future choices based on the dictates of a tyrant who doesn't even accurately represent what we lived through.
When you decide whether to return to that island, you won't ask the experiencing self who loved the beach. You will obey the remembering self who hated the airport.
So if our memories are editing out our joy, our plans are fueled by blind optimism, our social judgments are inherently flawed, and our daily choices are easily hacked by anchors and frames, what is the recourse? Are we biologically doomed to bumble through reality making terrible decisions?
We are not doomed, but overcoming these biological defaults requires deliberate, structured effort. The encyclopedic sources detail the science of debiasing and a specific clinical approach called cognitive bias modification, or CBM.
Tell me about debiasing.
Debiasing relies on the premise that while we cannot turn off System 1, we can train System 2 to recognize the environmental triggers that usually lead to cognitive errors. By using nudges, checklists, and structured training, we can force a pause.
So it's about forcing System 2 to wake up.
We can artificially inject cognitive friction into a decision, forcing System 2 to wake up and audit the math.
It is about building an external scaffolding to support our internal weaknesses.
Yeah.
Like if you know about the anchoring effect, you can consciously prepare for a salary negotiation by setting your own aggressive anchor internally before stepping into the room, effectively short-circuiting their attempt to prime you.
Exactly. And cognitive bias modification takes this from the boardroom to the clinical setting. CBM is actively used in psychological therapies to treat severe anxiety, depression, and substance addiction.
How does it work for that?
Well, in these pathologies, cognitive biases are highly amplified. For instance, a person with severe anxiety suffers from a pronounced attentional bias toward threats. Their System 1 is hypervigilant, scanning every room, every conversation, specifically for negative cues, while completely ignoring neutral or positive data.
Their WASIAD mechanism is feeding them a reality constructed entirely of threats.
Precisely. CBM utilizes computer-based tasks to literally retrain the brain's associative networks. Patients practice tasks where they are forced to disengage their attention from threatening stimuli and direct it toward positive stimuli.
So it's like physical therapy for the brain.
Yes. Through thousands of repetitions, they begin to rewire the automatic routing of System 1. The same is done with addiction. An addict's brain has an overwhelming attentional bias toward drug-related cues.
Right.
CBM therapies train them to automatically divert their visual and cognitive attention away from those cues. The research indicates that even brief, one-shot training interventions can yield measurable, sustained reductions in specific biases months later.
That is deeply encouraging. It suggests neuroplasticity allows us to manually update our own autocorrect dictionary.
It does.
But as we reach the conclusion of this deep dive, we have to address the monumental meta-plot twist detailed in the data. We have to talk about what happened to the science of cognitive bias itself. Because, as it turns out, knowing all of this, literally writing the textbook on cognitive bias, does not grant you immunity.
No, it does not. It is a profoundly humbling chapter in the history of psychology. Over the past decade, the social sciences have been grappling with what is known as the replication crisis.
Right, the replication crisis.
Researchers have discovered that many classic, widely taught psychological studies cannot be reproduced. When independent labs run the exact same experiments with new participants, the original effects simply vanish.
Meaning the original study was a fluke.
If a finding cannot be replicated, the foundational science is considered highly unreliable. And Kahneman's masterpiece, Thinking Fast and Slow, was caught in the crossfire.
The man who won a Nobel Prize for explaining how our brains jump to false conclusions, jumped to a false conclusion.
He really did.
The sources point specifically to Chapter 4 of his book, titled The Associative Machine. This chapter relied very heavily on a subfield called social priming, the idea that incredibly subtle, unconscious environmental cues can drastically alter human behavior.
Social priming produced some of the most famous pop psychology studies of the 2000s. There were studies claiming that if college students read words associated with old age like Florida or Winkle, they would unconsciously walk much slower down a hallway.
I remember reading about that one.
Kahneman cited these studies extensively as proof of System 1's profound susceptibility to the environment.
But when independent scientists began rigorously evaluating the literature in that chapter, the foundation crumbled. The sources cite an analysis using a statistical tool called the Replicability Index, or R-index.
The R-index.
This metric evaluates the statistical power of a body of research to determine the probability that the studies are actually true. A robust scientific finding scores high. The R-index for Chapter 4 of Thinking, Fast and Slow was an abysmal 14 out of 100.
A score of 14 indicates essentially no statistical reliability. The studies Kahneman relied upon were severely underpowered. They used sample sizes that were far too small to draw meaningful conclusions.
So the exciting results were almost certainly statistical noise or false positives that managed to get published.
Exactly.
The irony is almost poetic. Kahneman, the greatest living expert on human error, fell victim to the exact biases he discovered, operating within his own professional domain.
He exhibited confirmation bias. He wanted the social priming studies to be true because they perfectly supported his broader narrative about System 1.
And he fell for the availability heuristic. These studies were highly novel, widely discussed, and very vivid, making them seem more robust than they actually were.
Right. And he was a victim of W.I. Sayati. He looked at the published coherent narrative of the data and failed to fully engage his System 2 to calculate the underlying statistical power of the methodology.
It is the ultimate validation of his life's work, though perhaps not in the way he intended.
Yeah.
It proves definitively that expertise does not deactivate System 1. Knowing about cognitive bias does not immunize you against it.
But to Kahneman's immense credit, when presented with the R-index data, he did not double down defensively.
No, he didn't.
He publicly admitted his error, stating in a blog post, "I place too much faith in underpowered studies." His intellectual honesty remains an absolute benchmark for science.
It really does. But the lesson is clear. Critical thinking is not a permanent state of enlightenment you achieve. It is a metabolically expensive, deeply unnatural process that you must actively choose to engage over and over again every single day.
Every single day.
We've covered massive ground today, dissecting the biological reality of our mental operating systems. We have seen how System 1's desperate need to conserve energy forces it to rely on associative heuristics, substituting complex math for simple matching games.
We explored the vulnerabilities of prospect theory, showing how our deep-seated loss aversion makes us easy targets for strategic anchors and emotional framing.
We exposed the dark side of our own optimism, watching as WISIAD blinds us to the unknown, trapping us in doomed projects because we cannot tolerate the pain of a sunk cost.
We scaled that up to the societal level, realizing that the fundamental attribution error makes us harsh, context-blind judges of others, providing the perfect psychological kindling for digital algorithms to spread emotional misinformation.
And we ventured inward, confronting the uncomfortable truth that our remembering self acts as an evolutionary editor, frequently discarding the vast majority of our lived joy in favor of dramatic peaks and intense endings. We recognize now that while retraining the brain is possible, even the architects of behavioral economics are bound by the same flawed, beautiful biology as the rest of us.
It's been an incredible deep dive.
Which brings me to a final thought to leave you with long after this deep dive is over.
Yeah.
We discussed Kahneman's realization that the experiencing self who does my living is like a stranger to me. Because your remembering self makes all the decisions. Your life is essentially directed by an archivist who doesn't care about your daily happiness. So the next time you find yourself agonizing over a major life choice, whether to take that demanding new job, whether to move across the country, or even just how to plan your next vacation, pause and ask yourself this. Are you making this choice to maximize the actual joy and fulfillment of the experience as you live it, day by day, hour by hour? Or are you simply trying to write a dramatic, satisfying ending for the stranger in your head who will eventually remember it? Because whether you are navigating the savannah, parsing a digital newsfeed, or steering the spaceship of your own life, recognizing who is actually sitting at the controls is the first step to taking them back. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of the human mind. Until next time.